This is Inside the BFA, the official podcast of the Balloon Federation of America. Each episode of Inside the BFA is an open discussion of the many aspects of the sport of ballooning and the BFA's work to represent its members and the ballooning community at large. Now, here's your host, editor of the BFA's Ballooning Journal, Glenn Moyer.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of Inside the BFA. I'm Glenn Moyer, and tonight we have a very special subject that we think will be of interest to our entire ballooning audience, certainly should be, and we have a very special guest we're excited to bring to you this evening. Our subject tonight is drones, balloons, and the future of airspace. I'm going to be joined tonight by our BFA Southeast Regional Director, Mr. Dave Sullivan. Most of our viewers will know Dave, along with Pat Cannon, has been instrumental in representing the interest of the BFA with regard to the newly proposed Part 108 of the Federal Aviation Regulations, as well as, which of course involves the integration of UAS systems into our now shared airspace. To get us off to this discussion tonight, we have a very special guest, and that is Mr. Dallas Brooks. Now, Dallas is the aviation standards and outreach lead for Wing, an alphabet company, where he leads Wing's interactions with global aviation stakeholders to shape policy, standards, and procedures to improve aviation safety. Wing, if you don't know, is one of the three primary UAV operators providing drone capabilities for commercial outlets like Walmart, Amazon, and others. He also serves as the industry co-chair of the FAA's Chartered Drone Safety Team, a government industry partnership that is created to support and promote drone safety. Now, his background is very diverse and very lengthy. We could spend most of this podcast probably talking about his introduction. But his background includes overseeing the Department of Defense's UAS integration efforts as the military director of the DoD Policy Board on Federal Aviation, co-founding and leading multiple federal scientific and research and development bodies on UAS integration, and serving, as if that weren't enough, serving as the chairman of the board for AUVSI, the world's largest uncrewed systems trade association. He has served on 5 aviation rulemaking committees and on countless aviation committees and panels supporting UAS integration. You get the idea. This guy knows a little bit about what he's going to be talking about. Dallas is also retired from the United States Air Force as a lieutenant colonel. He retired in 2010. He is an instrument-rated commercial pilot and an FAA-licensed remote pilot. So, first of all, thank you, Dallas, for joining us, and thank you for your service to our country, both within the military and without.
Thanks, Glenn. You're very kind. I appreciate it.
You're most welcome, sir. Our plan tonight may take on the appearance of a congressional hearing, though it's certainly only by coincidence, and that's because Dallas is going to make an opening presentation leading to a follow-on question and answer session that Dave's going to take the lead on. I'll be monitoring our chat room where our viewers, as always, are invited to pose questions, and toward the end of the program, I'll join the conversation again and bring as many of those questions as we can get to as time allows. We don't have a real-time limit tonight. If the conversation gets down into the nitty-gritty and stays lively, we'll continue on as long as we need to get the answers we hope that you'll be looking for. So with that, let me say thanks again, Dallas, for being here tonight. Let me bring Dave center stage. He has a few opening remarks, and let's get the conversation off and running. Dave?
Thank you, Glenn. Good to be back. As our viewers know, we've been working this issue now. It's coming up on a year. And in recent months, we've been able to establish some good working relationships with the 3 majors in the drone industry, Wing, Zipline, and Amazon. This is the first of 3 sessions we hope to do with our principal organizations. And this is just another effort to try to get the word out, help educate the community, and let our viewers know, our pilots out there know what we can expect in the future as far as working in the airspace and everybody trying to play nice in the same sandbox. I think this is going to be an interesting discussion. I know I've got several questions for Dallas. We've talked a couple of times. I've asked several already. I've got a few custom ones for tonight. Should be very interesting. Looking forward to the presentation.
Sorry, Dave, just very quickly, we already have some questions coming in from the viewers this evening, too. So it's going to be a lively conversation.
Going to be one of those nights.
Well, hopefully I'll get a chance to through talking a little bit before we get into the Q&A. There's a lot of them I think will probably be answered right off the bat. And then we can start
give you a
getting
little
into
bit of time there, Dallas, sure. Dave, sorry, go ahead. Didn't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Well,
Dallas, you have the floor, sir.
Well, sure. Thanks, first off, for the warm introduction and for the opportunity to sit down and talk with you guys. It's been a wonderful relationship. You know, we about 2.5 years ago, we invited Pat Cannon out to visit our headquarters, operational headquarters in Dallas Fort Worth. Gave him a tour of the facility, explained to him how we worked, and most importantly, our focus on an aviation safety culture and what that means. Really, the conversation was absolutely fantastic for a lot of reasons. First off, it gave me a chance to get to know Pat, and first off, what an incredible aviation history that man has, right? Vietnam helo pilot, he's an FAA examiner, he's flown everything under the sun, and so we just talked airplanes for quite a bit before we even got to anything else. But then, once we started getting down to principles and the things that Wing prioritizes, and some lines that we just make sure we never cross. I think it really helped foster understanding that there are certainly things in this new world that we're entering into, particularly with the new rule that may be coming out, where there are concerns that need to be addressed. Hopefully tonight I can lay some fears to rest about particularly how Wing is addressing those concerns to make sure that we stay out of your way, period. What I brought along to sort of kick things off, very short video, just a few minutes. It's not oriented towards aviation in particular. It's just sort of how a wing delivery operation works, and that sort of gives you an opportunity to see the airplane fly. And from there, we can sort of get into the nuts and bolts of how we approach safety and how we approach cooperation with other aviation users. But first off, for those who've never seen a wing airplane, there's one right behind me, by the way. That's an actual one. It's about 11 pounds of styrofoam, and there's a whole lot of features built into it that I'll talk about later. But in the meantime, let's start by rolling the video.
Wing Drone Delivery delivers your order from the store to your door in less than 30 minutes. Once you have the app downloaded, placing an order is simple. Adding products and checking out is similar to other e-commerce checkout processes. Just enter your address, and we'll show you delivery zones on your property. Once your order is placed, Wing's system automatically processes the order and plans a flight to get your products to you quickly. The drones are highly automated, travel at speeds up to 65 miles per hour, and fly a few hundred feet above all the stop signs and traffic jams below. This is how Wing drones are able to deliver your package in 30 minutes or less from the moment your order is placed. While the drone is in transit, the app will give you real-time updates on your package's location and an estimated time of delivery. The only thing needed to receive a drone delivery is a clear space on the property with vertical access to the sky. No additional infrastructure or landing pads are needed to receive a drone delivery. The app will give you a precise location of where the drone will deliver the package prior to the drone arriving. You'll want to make sure that this area is clear of any clutter or obstructions. Upon arriving, the drone will hover about 20 feet above the delivery zone and gently lower your package down on a hook and tether system. Once the drone has left the delivery zone, it's safe to retrieve your package. Want to see if Wing's drone delivery is available in your area? Sign up today.
Wow.
It's really, we've gotten this thing down to such a science. I work here every day and I'm still blown away by what our operations team accomplishes on a daily basis and our engineering team with the automation that we use. But the airplane itself is one of basically two major things that I want to talk about to sort of open the discussion. One is the airplane and the other is how we approach operating. The airplane itself, and I've got a slide on this. As I said, there's one behind me here, but it was the thing that brought me to Wing. I was coming out of the academic research world about 5 years ago when I joined Wing, and looking in the commercial space, and this is what hooked me in, because of all the drone companies that were out there, Wing did the best job, in my view, and I still believe it, in making sure that no matter how remote a collision might be or what systems you have in place to avoid a collision, ultimately it matters that the impact of that collision is as minor as possible. And so when your drone is made largely of styrofoam, the motors are very tiny. There's no center of mass other than the batteries, which are actually separated and separate, so they don't provide one center piece, and they're designed to eject out the bottom in the case of an impact. The drone itself crumples into pieces, so there's very little that's actually harmful in the drone. It shatters when it hits hard surfaces, and as you'll see, like the propellers that are along the boom, they don't really extend past the ends of the boom. They're all made of lightweight plastic, and so they do what they do. And when they stop suddenly, the motors are capable of high RPM but aren't particularly high torque, which means they don't keep chewing once they've hit something that impedes their progress. And so all of these things mean that an impact with one of our drones is far less substantial than an impact with something larger, faster, or heavier. And that's, again, one of the key things that brought me to Wing, and one of the reasons I believe so much in what we're doing in this company. And the other piece is how we approach flying. Our basic tenet is we don't want to fly where you are. I mean, bottom line, we don't want to fly where you are. So we've limited our operations intentionally to places where the majority of fixed wing aircraft aren't, period. And for those few airplanes or aircraft, I'm sorry, that can fly places, we put mitigations in place to stay away from the air as well. And I'll give you some examples. We intentionally limit our operations currently to the Mozi Vale surrounding Class B airports. So there's 37, I think, Class B airports in the U.S. They're all over fairly highly populated areas. And since we're operating sub 500 feet, that filters out 90% plus of the fixed wing aircraft that could be flying. So sub 500 feet in these areas, even the helicopters that do fly there are required to squawk, and so we can avoid them with an automated ADS-B-based DAA system. And so that sort of brings us down to we've already mitigated the risk of almost everybody that's in the fixed wing or helo environment that flies down at that area. And then now we talk about what's remaining, ultralight, lighter than air aircraft, things like that. And a lot of that is done through coordination and research. So before we go into an area, we reach out to the various aviation communities. We talk to airports, we talk to operators, we talk to tour providers, we talk to all sorts of service providers that fly, law enforcement. If you fly in the area, we want to talk to you. And this process starts more than a year before we go into a new town. And so when we do that, aviation being aviation, all of us have been around for a long time, and we know that the aviation culture says that we're safe by cooperating. We're safe by talking to each other. When I go into an uncontrolled field in my Grumman, I'm announcing my position, calling my base, calling my final, and so everyone knows where I am. That's part of the participation part of safety. And so through this outreach and coordination, our first offer on the table, and we talked about this with Pat 2.5 years ago, was if you let us know you're flying somewhere, we're just going to draw a big circle around that and not go in there. Because our system is that simple. It's so sophisticated that all we have to do is drag a mouse, create a circle, and hit a button, and our drones will go around that circle until that circle is lifted. And so if we know about your operation, we're automatically going to fence it out. And that means that we may, in some cases will, lose deliveries during that time period to homes, and we're okay with that because safety is our first priority. There's always opportunities where folks may not have gotten the word, may not know where to reach out. And so in spite of all our other sophisticated mechanisms we have in place, we still poke our head out the door particularly during areas or times of activity where it's more likely for balloonists, right, in the morning and early evening. But we still put eyeballs out there to make sure that if there's activity, we've done everything that we can to spot it, no matter how participative or not participative that they are. And fortunately, the great thing about balloons is one of the most highly visible aircraft in the sky. So that really helps us. Bottom line, between the outreach, the coordination, where we choose to fly, there's a tremendous amount I haven't covered in terms of we automatically bracket out other places where there's aviation activities, obviously airports, heliports, even areas where there's high amounts of tour activity. We just put circles around them and leave them inactive the entire time. So much to go into. Part of it will be covered in the Q&A, but bottom line, those two approaches, which is we have no desire to fly where you are, and we'll do anything we can to avoid doing so. And B, we've made our airplane as non-harmful as possible in the very rare event, and it's never happened, that a wing drone might get somewhere close to some other type of aircraft.
I guess I'll jump in here quick, and then I'll let Dave get into some of his more serious questions. You just made an interesting comment that I'd like to know a little bit more about. You said when you go into a new area, a new town, then you do outreach to find out where, for example, balloons would be operating. So if you were to begin operations here in where I'm at in Shreveport, Louisiana, what type of notification outreach could I expect as a light of the air pilot to have with Wing? What kind of interaction as you are beginning to set up operations here so that we could identify areas where we fly, the times of days that we fly, that sort of thing? How is that contact made, and what is that outreach like?
Well, we actually have an outreach team headed up by Kendall Prozac that does an absolutely wonderful job, and a guy named Josh Gordon that does a lot of the boots on the ground stuff, particularly with airspace deconfliction and things like that. Dave, you've nodded. I think you've probably talked with Josh before.
That's how we got involved, or that's how I got involved with Wing. And I had heard about it through the FAST team or the FAST safety team notifications. I got the note. Turned out y'all are having a meeting at the airport nearest me. And I went over there, ended up meeting Josh, and that's kind of how I got into the Wing family, so to speak.
Yep. And that's basically, we sort of developed. It's not a perfect playbook, but it's certainly a pretty good playbook about as we've gone from city to city to city to city. The way aviation works. If you start talking to the airports and you ask the airports, "Hey, who else flies around here?" They'll give you a couple pointers, and then those folks will give you other pointers, and next thing you know, you're talking to a whole lot of people. And our process has sort of evolved out of that. Particularly with BFA, relations are already great, and if we just our first outreach will probably be at the headquarters level to say, hey guys, we're thinking about moving into this particular area. It's usually with plenty of advance notice, by the way. And so we may want to talk to the chapter, or in some cases, John may already have a contact and reach out to that chapter directly. But you guys are definitely on our list and have been for quite some time. So if there's a BFA chapter, we're definitely going to outreach to them directly. And otherwise, we'll probably talk at the headquarters level to say, is there something we're missing?
That's good. That's good. I like that. And having gone through that experience myself, not only with you, but with Zipline as well, I think we've got a good relationship established. And as long as we maintain that open communication, I think we'll be just fine. Mm-hmm. Your slide earlier showed where you guys are already operating, and then a few potential sites that you plan on expanding into. Is that pretty much this year? Is that over the next 2 or 3 years? That slide, 2 or 3 years. I mean, what's the time frame on this?
That's pretty much through 2027. So through next year. Okay,
so you're going to stick pretty much with that. Now, here
as far as announced sites, yes. Now our team is always working on what we're doing next, but as far as things that are announced so far, that's what we have.
Okay, super. I noticed here recently, I live on the south side of Atlanta, and over to McDonough, there's been announcements that you guys are going to start doing DoorDash deliveries. Is that going to be another outreach program for you guys, or are you satelliting that on to the already existing Amazon sites?
So we have no connection with Amazon whatsoever.
Not Amazon, I'm sorry. Walmart.
Yeah. Walmart, yes, there we go. Amazon would probably take exception to if people thought we were delivering their stuff. but so Walmart and DoorDash are two separate partnership agreements. So we work with both companies. Obviously, they do very different things. And location expansion, obviously I think we're up to projecting around north of 250 Walmarts by the end of next year. And the DoorDash locations, I don't have a number on that, but once we've established operations in a given area, there's just synergies that allow us to work
Right.
both DoorDash and Walmart at the same time.
Good. You and I talked, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago on a subject that I want to bring back up for our viewers. What's the demographics or the criteria for Wing to go into a specific area?
Well, I mentioned one at the top, which was right now we are committed to operating in the Mochi Vale that's underlying Class B airspace. So as I said, there's 37 Class B airports, but mostly when you think about Class B airport, you think about major city, and
Sure.
and so those are the places that give us a lot of natural advantages that I've already outlined. It's not that we're closing the door to operating in other locations. It's something we're always looking at. But as far as you'll notice in the map that we saw earlier, that those areas are mostly associated with that Class B sort of criteria. Other demographics are just the economic variables that make it worthwhile to bring a service to an area, right? What we try to do is allow our partners to provide very cost-effective deliveries, and volume is a big piece of that. So if the more deliveries you're making per day, the greater you can bring down your cost per delivery. So the economies of scale are a big deal there, and so we tend to sort of focus on areas that have enough potential customers that and retailers that can support the volume that those customers demand, such as Walmart, in a way that it works out from both the drone delivery side and the retail side that's beneficial for both.
Dallas,
So
Steve
Go ahead.
Turner is, I'm sorry, Dave, Steve Turner, we're getting a lot of questions online tonight, which is a good thing. Steve Turner is asking about limitations. He specifically said, what are the wind limitations for a winged drone? Can they fly in light rain? I'm curious if you could expand that. Just basically, what are your weather limitations, your fly, no fly limitations, if there are any at all?
Oh, there are. I want to be careful because I think my information may be old, quite frankly. There have been quite a few advances lately. We've done quite a bit of rain testing. The airplane performs fantastically in anything that we'd want to fly in, quite frankly. Wind, boy, I want to be careful not to throw out a wrong number here, but it seemed to me that it was around a 15 knot steady component. I remember I was at the launch premiere in the DFW area. We were at a Walgreens, which was a former partner of ours, and we had a small nest in their parking lot, and that nest has a chain link fence around it with sort of that green screen sort of stuff that you put on a fence, so people aren't seeing through it. And it just happened to be an incredibly windy day. And we have the FAA there. We have several city mayors there, right? And we're about to launch and do it. We were right on the edge of our envelope, whatever that was. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this might be interesting, because I hadn't seen us fly in anything more than about a 5-knot wind component. And sure enough, the airplane lifts off of the pad, and then it clears the fence. It was about a 6 or 7, I think it was a 6-foot fence. And that blast of wind hit it. And the airplane came up and it went like this, just like that. So it took the wind, immediately corrected, and had moved maybe 3 feet to the side, 4 feet to the side, and restabilized. And I was just like, dang. And it turned out that one of the FAA folks in attendance, I think it was the lead for their integration program office, had literally said afterwards, "We're so glad that we had the opportunity to see you operate on a day like today, because it really, really helped us, have some confidence that this airplane should do what it does so well."
Super. Let's go back to something you sort of touched on earlier. With the advent of 108, and of course, we still don't know when that's actually going to present itself to the public. We're waiting. We continue to wait. But in 108, and because of it, we've had several discussions in many parts of the community regarding detect and avoid. That's the word, the words on everybody's mouth or on everybody's lips. What DAA mechanism does Wing use? That's our concern.
Oh, absolutely. So as I explained before, there's DAA, which is this little circle of sort of last minute actions. And then there's collision avoidance, which is a much larger universe. So all of the things that we do to make sure that we don't, we call them encounters, right? So this is sort of uh, DAA jargon per se, since I've spent a lot of time in this area. The terms, an encounter is just being somewhere in proximity to another aircraft. Nothing bad necessarily is going to happen. It's akin to the first time you put an eyeballs in another airplane or other aircraft when you're in the air, right? You see them, you know they're there, you're going to pay attention to them, but it's not necessarily a conflict, right? Most of the time it isn't. So by minimizing encounters in the first place, that greatly reduces your risk. But when we do have them, our automated DAA system is ADS-B based. So we have ADS-B in capability on the aircraft. We are not allowed per FAA regulation to have ADS-B out. And so ADS-B in acquires the aircraft, tracks it, calculates the maneuver that we need. Our maneuvers are very simple. It's basically when we see a potential conflict, first thing we do is slow down. And if necessary, stop, because our airplane can hover and let the airplane go by, the other aircraft go by. And if that doesn't happen, for some reason it's still coming at us, then we drop. Because we can lose altitude very quickly. All you do is slow down your propellers and you drop like a rock. So we can drop down to a very low level and let whatever aircraft it is pass right over us. In the 1 in a million situation where, let's say it's a helicopter and we stopped and they're still coming at us, and then we dropped and then they're on top of us and then they start to descend, which would involve a whole lot of highly coincidental factors, then our airplane just simply settles down to a landing over an area that has no particular obstacles or risk factors beneath it.
Interesting. All right, as a follow-up then, for the drones to see each other, my understanding is that the systems are using remote ID. True?
No.
Not with
So
Wing.
remote ID is there for a very specific purpose. So that is essentially so that others, particularly law enforcement, can identify an aircraft specifically, like point a remote ID receiver at it and garner an identification. Remote ID is specifically not to be used per the FAA for any separation action. It wasn't designed for that. And so remote ID is about accountability. So if a drone or drone operator behaves badly, then there's a way to identify it while it's in the air and trace it back to its owner, but it is not about a separation or safety.
Super. Thanks for clearing that up for me.
Yep.
Touchy subject. We talk a lot in the legacy aviation community. That is, when I say legacy aviation, that's everybody except you guys.
Well, me personally, yes, but but I understand what you're saying.
Okay, I get that. But we talk a lot about risk management, and of course, that's a real broad spectrum of issues and ideas. Excuse me. I'm curious how Wing perceives risk management. How do you assess the risk involved? How have you assessed the risk involved in order to get to where you are now?
Oh my gosh, we've done nothing but, Dave. What we had to do, first off, what we chose to do, which was sort of overkill, and then what we had to present to the FAA to get approval to operate beyond visual line of sight, this years of work. And so we had done probably the deepest airspace analysis ever conducted by a private company when we went into our first area, which is Dallas-Fort Worth. We had to, at the time, buy multiple years of FAA data from all their different sensors, all their different radars, primary, secondary, ADS-B, all of that stuff. We tracked where all the airplanes went over those 3 years, and then we modeled operations out of all the different locations where we might choose to operate, and then to random deliveries within the coverage area of each one of our operating locations, and then through thousands and thousands of operations out of those sites, like basically oversaturated the ability of those sites to actually perform in the real world, just to see how many times out of all of these situations would we have a conflict, and if so, would our avoidance algorithm if employed as it should, avoid that conflict. And then literally do the math and present to the FAA, this is what happens. And then after you do all that modeling and simulation, and we chose models that the FAA had used and accepted before, by the way, we then had to demonstrate that our airplane performed as the model had modeled it to do so. In other words, you build assumptions for airplane performance into the model, then you have to go flight test the aircraft in front of the FAA to say, it really does stop that fast. It really does drop that fast. It really can sense an airplane that far out. And you had to validate all of that. And so, oh my gosh, we spent so many years doing this, laying the groundwork, because we knew we weren't laying the groundwork for Dallas-Fort Worth. We were laying the groundwork for every place we wanted to be after that. Mm-hmm. And so we always assumed harder, longer, more in order to make sure that we were overkill in the safety department.
Dallas, if I can jump in again with a couple of questions here. One from one of our viewers is asking, are you monitoring ground-based ADS-B or aircraft-to-aircraft type, or is there a difference? And the second question that I have, if I understand what you're saying correctly, since you can't have, is what you say, ADS-B out, then there's really no way for me as a balloonist to see electronically a drone. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And there are, well, I don't want to talk for the FAA, but I'll tell you what I've heard on that in sort of just a second. I want to make sure that I answer all of the components of your questions. We did consider piping in ADS-B ground station data, but quite frankly, it really wasn't relevant. To avoid a collision, you want to have the freshest data possible. You want it to be as direct as possible. And so receiving that signal directly from other aircraft in proximity is key. And so we focused on that. We made sure that our ADS-B receivers did a great job. They're manufactured by Avionics, a company that a lot of you are probably familiar with. They do a lot of certified aircraft electronics. And obviously we did a tremendous amount of testing in terms of our radius of reception. But ground-based ADS-B data, so as we all know, so when I'm flying, I'm not picking up an ADS-B ground station until I'm at least 2,500 feet, because I fly in the country. Now, when you fly closer to the city, you should have more ADS-B receivers. It'll pick you up lower, but it's still, line of sight is an issue with ground stations. The lower you get, the less likely you are to pick up that data. So it's less reliable. Whereas the airborne data, right, what's the most proximate data you're going to get is stuff that's co-altitude or near co-altitude. And that's the stuff we care about the most. Those are the folks that we might want to conflict with, or we might conflict with. And so air-to-air data is so much more timely, so much more relevant than ground station ADS-B data for all of the reasons I've talked about. And now you got a follow-up question, I think, about.
The other question was what you were saying. Since you don't have ADS-B out, there's no way. Well, of course, we're not equipped with ADS-B anyway at this point. But if there were to be developed a device where we could see ADS-B, we would not be able to see your drone electronically. It would have to be basically line of sight.
That is correct. And there are early on, one of the substantiations that the FAA said about ADS-B out is the thought of adding thousands of operations per day to what's already fairly dense ADS-B airspace. When we talk about subclass B, the ground stations have a limit in terms of how many targets they can track at once, and they didn't want drones basically clogging up that system. So that was one of the first justifications for drones don't need to squawk ADS-B out. Now the second piece, and different people have different opinions on this, but I've seen the modeling, and I can tell you this from my perspective is very true, is that if you put ADS-B out on, say, hundreds of drones that may be operating simultaneously over a given metro area, if I'm flying in my Grumman I fly into Dallas fairly routinely, and when I usually fly into Arlington Airport. If I'm flying into Arlington and my ADS-B has hundreds of targets painted on it from drones, most of which are below me for 99.9% of my flight, do I care? No. Now, when I get down to sub 500 feet. In my case, I'm going to be on approach to an airport. So our drones aren't going to be anywhere near that airport, so that makes that piece easy. But if you're a pilot and you are painting a drone ADS-B target and you're looking for them, if they're the size of our airplane, you're probably not going to see them at all, because the airplane from a side view is basically a few inches of styrofoam. And so keeping in mind that drone is required to avoid you, it already has a plan. And so if that drone begins to execute an avoidance maneuver, and then the pilot does something completely unpredictable, then that can actually, in some cases, make the situation worse. And so it's very important that, for example, there are rules in the old school fighter days that nose high goes high, that or you alter course to the right, fundamental things that most pilots are supposed to do. But when you've got a drone coming towards you and you're a crewed pilot that's maneuverable, obviously you guys aren't necessarily maneuverable, then what you do in the absence of a specific rule other than possibly turn right affects obviously what we do, and in some cases can make that worse. In our cases, like I said, we're going to slow down and stop. So it may look like we're coming towards you, but we're going to stop doing that, and then we're going to drop, so we're going to get well below you. But if you've executed a maneuver and are losing altitude, then obviously that can be countering some of that safety. So with all the responsibility, we're going to talk about asymmetric risk in a minute, Dave. I know you want to bring that up, but with all the talk about the load of risk, the burden of performance is on the drone, and that's essentially 100%. And we want to be able to do that job as efficiently and effectively as possible. And what makes aviation safe? Predictability. If you know what the other guy's going to do, you can always make the safe maneuver. It's the unknown that can get you. So for those reasons, there's a lot of, I would personally advocate that you really don't want a lot of drone targets on your screen. And even if you found a way to filter them to only certain relevant ones, those same drones are going to avoid you. And you could actually get into sort of a game of chicken where you're trying to do something and they're trying to do something, and literally take away margin of safety that already exists.
You talked about I'm sorry. You talked about the size of the of your drone, and I've got a couple of questions from viewers about that. Is your size for your operation for Wing locked in, or do you have plans? Do you foresee that you might at some point be operating larger, heavier drones? And a follow-up, I guess, a similar question that's come in from one of our viewers tonight is who's actually piloting the drone, and what's the largest drone size and weight that's allowed at present? Now, and I'm guessing that Wing is not the largest that there is. Clearly.
Oh, no. So we already have a larger model. So this particular model, the 11-pound one that's behind me, carries a less than 3-pound payload. So it's good for, I think, 2.7 pounds, something like that. We have developed a larger model. It looks just like that. It's got fewer propellers, but other than that, you just sort of increase the dimensions. So instead of 11 pounds, it's 17 pounds, but it carries 5 pounds. So we've essentially doubled the payload with only a 50% increase in weight, and I think a less than 50% increase in size, just under that. So we've taken all of the good things about our design and construction of this airplane and marginally scaled it to be able to bring a few more things to your house, which is helpful, but without really compromising the safety side of it. And so as I said, that's one of our core tenets is keep the airplane safe, and we're always going to do that.
So you talked a few times here, Dallas, about the diversion, the actual avoidance maneuver. Do you have a criteria or a distance by which you want to miss an obstacle?
We do, and so a lot of math went into that as well. So there's a big difference between avoiding a collision, which you can avoid a collision with very little margin, and not actually collide, but basically, avoiding an area around the aircraft that gives you substantial buffer, and so our system is actually designed to target around 200 meters from that aircraft, so more than 500 feet from the aircraft. The FAA requires reporting of anytime you have an incursion within 500 feet that's co-altitude. And so there's a whole lot of reasons why it's just not a good idea from both the safety and administrative perspective to get inside of 500 feet for another aircraft laterally. And usually, of course, as I talked about before, vertical is your friend. So when you can separate vertically, that's the best way to do it. But yeah, our system targets about 200 meters from the aircraft.
Good to know. All right, let's go back to the term you used a minute ago, asymmetric risk. There's a new that's a new term in all the communities, I think. Copyright Gordon Schwankowski, I think, because I believe he's the one that actually came up with it. What that means, there's a perception that we, under the provisions of 108, should it stand as currently written, that most of the risk is going to be assumed by us, being non-compliant aircraft. I'm hearing good things as far as risk management, risk assessment, risk mitigation. What are your thoughts on the whole term of asymmetric risk and how that applies to the balloon community?
I think you phrased it very well when you said as currently written with the rule. So of all the things that were put out in the NPRM, the thing that got the most comments, and this is straight from the FAA, was the issue of right of way, and the changes of those rules, right? So I would say it's certainly not a given that what's proposed in the NPRM makes it into the final rule.
I hope so.
Yeah, from our perspective, we've tried to make sure that doesn't matter as much as possible. We're still going to do everything that we do to keep our airplanes safe now. But quite frankly, the rule as drafted, we're already operating at scale under appropriate approvals and waivers without a right-of-way change. So we've done everything that we can within the current system to garner approval. Should there be a right-of-way change? Again, I'm talking as a general aviation pilot myself. That's a structural change in the NAS, right? I mean, right-of-way is a very fundamental thing.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
So should there be one? Then would it be asymmetric? Yes, it would be asymmetric. I would counter that. However, what I said before is the burden of right-of-way may shift in one direction, but the burden of performance shifts in the other. In which case, you may be yielding right-of-way, but at the same time, that drone has responsibility to avoid you at all costs. And so, the key to that in the future, and I think you guys are already exploring this, Dave, is what electronic conspicuity means. And when we use the phrase electronic conspicuity, it's a way of announcing your position. ADS-B is a form of electronic conspicuity, but it's not the only one. There are, a simple transponder is technically that. There's various things like FLARM in Europe. There's an ADSL also in Europe. That's sort of a low power ADS-B. There's lots of ways to do this. But my friend John Damish, who works over at UAvionics, they have a device called a Sky Echo. It's about yay big, weighs a few ounces. And it's literally like 2 by 3 inches. Battery powered, self-contained antenna. And for cockpitted aircraft, you could stick it on a suction cup inside of your windshield. For a balloon, there's a clamp you can put on a riser, and literally you turn it on, and boom, you're squawking. You're squawking at a lower power, which does a lot of good things for the NAS and good things for collision avoidance as well. For the NAS, it means that you're not necessarily on ADS-B ground stations, right? You're not having to reach miles and miles and miles to reach a ground station, but the proximate traffic around you is aware of where you are and what your altitude is.
We're looking at a peer-to-peer transmission as opposed to air-ground back to air again,
right?
Exactly. In the combined. Yeah. Now, and you said earlier, the whole issue with ADS-B, that you don't want to congest the frequency. Well, that's already a problem. Keep thinking of ADS-B as being the be-all, end-all, but 1090 ES, which is your ADS-B frequency, is horribly overcrowded. And I think that's why they spec'd 978 UAT within the proposed rule for us to fall back on. So that's what we would be looking at. That's the problem, unfortunately, with the Sky Echo. It's not set up to transmit on 978. It will receive, but it doesn't transmit. It only transmits on 1090.
I'm not sure that's what my
I have
understanding,
one.
Dave.
Yeah, sitting here in the shop.
No. I doubt you have a Sky Echo because it's not approved for use in the U.S.
No, it was brought in from Europe.
Well, okay, but from our discussions with
They're
Avionics,
they're working
their
another
intent
version
is
of it.
978. Yeah, I don't want to speak for them, but their intent for a U.S. product is 978 for the very reasons you brought out. I believe that the utilization rate on 978 is about 16%, so it's way underutilized.
Oh, and that would be an excellent fix. So what is the fix? Conspicuity versus a 978 based device, ADS-B, which we've got some problems with several issues. Specifically, the FAA has said no ADS-B on either balloons, but that's a different discussion. Possibly resurrecting the old TABS standard, TCO C199, or is something else appropriate?
Well, we talked
What's your
about TABS in the UAS aviation rulemaking committee report, which is now, goodness, 4 years old, maybe 5, because at the time there wasn't anything else out there, right? But with things like the planned version of Sky Echo and any other products, I don't want to just plug Avionics. It's just the one I'm aware of. I do think that's the answer, and we've seen that focus. We're not talking about balloons or drones right now. I'm just talking about aviation in general. There's been a tremendous focus in the wake of the crash at BCA between the helicopter and the American Airlines regional jet on what conspicuity could have done to prevent a crash like that, and how we all know the low altitude environment, you're particularly vulnerable because you just have so much less room to maneuver and time, right?
Oh,
and
absolutely.
So a portable, cheap electronic conspicuity device does so much. In fact, the only study I'm aware of on this is done by the Regulus group, and that if everyone equipped, and we're talking all different kinds of aircraft here, it reduces aircraft accidents by 53% and fatalities by 89%. I mean, that's nuts. That's a crazy improvement. And so being able to do that for a device that costs, hopefully a few $100s, and keeps everyone else safe, I think that is the future. I think that's why the FAA opened the door to other than certified units in the NPRM, right? So when I think that, I think the NORSI regs, the same NORSI program that allows me to use a Stratus or a Sky Beacon or other product to get ADS-B in, put it on my electronic flight bag on my iPad or iPhone. Those sorts of NORSI, it improves safety. It may not be perfect technology, but it makes people safer. So let's let them use it. I love that concept. I love what it's done for aviation. Nobody flight plans the way we used to flight plan. We all do it on an electronic device. We all do it with more confidence. We can track real-time weather with TIS-B. Think about all of those benefits and the incredible jump in safety that brought. I will fly on flights that I wouldn't have flown on before and feel safer while I do it. So bring that same concept to where you don't have to have a certified box that requires a high-powered electrical system to drive it and a larger antenna to make people safer. And don't say, we won't let you be safe at all unless you get all the way up to your 99.999%. Instead, we'll take 95% for a very low cost. 95%, that's a great number. Let's do that.
Let me take this safety discussion in a slightly different direction, if I can, here for a second. A question from Larry Simberger. He's asking, and I think I'm going to venture an answer, and then I'll let you take it, Dallas. He's asking, does Wing submit NOTAMs for its operations? How would a pilot normally be aware of Wing operations? My guess is that you would not, because once you become a regular day-to-day operator within a community, NOTAMs are generally meant for out of the ordinary types of hazards to watch out for. And if you're a regular daily operator within my community, you wouldn't be filing NOTAMs. Am I correct at that? And his second part of the question is, how otherwise would he normally be aware of your operations in an area?
So actually, you've caught me again in a situation where I have not asked that question in a while. We used to. I know that we routinely filed sort of basically standing NOTAMs, right? And the thing about a standing NOTAM is after a while it becomes noise because it's a standing NOTAM, right? So sooner, as you pointed out, a NOTAM is meant to be a notice about something unusual. So I actually can't give you a solid answer, but I can let Josh know, and Dave, he can talk to you about whether we're still actually filing NOTAMs. Because as we expand in areas, I think it's likely that we file NOTAMs in areas that we've recently expanded to. I don't know if we're still, for example, NOTAMing areas that we've been flying in for 3-4 years in the DFW area. And I apologize for not knowing off the top of my head, but I don't want to speak out of turn.
No, that's
The
fine.
answer
That's
is
the
yes.
purpose of this is, I'm sorry, Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, the answer is yes. The NOTAMs are still posted. They're out there. And we've learned something very interesting over the weekend. There are several, what we've heard of as pop-up NOTAMs that have gone up in a few areas that can't be traced back to any one of the big three. And we're finding out that those NOTAMs have been responder or LEO agencies. That took a little bit of digging. I expect to call on that in the next day or two. And if anything interesting comes out of that, we'll get it posted and out to the public. We've also got the issue in North Atlanta. I want to say Dunwoody or Cumming. I forget which town it is, but they're partnered with the company that has the license plate reader technology. And they are starting to supply drones to the LEO agencies up in that area. There are basically pop-up drones going up now that will have no NOTAMs. So there's kind of a dichotomy involved here. We have the established operators, Wing, Zipline, was it Flytrack, another one, Amazon, 2 or 3 others. They're posting NOTAMs, but then we have these pop-up drone operations with no NOTAMs. Same thing we're seeing with the ag operators at times.
Okay. We're running close to about our normal time limit here. I want to throw a couple of other questions in if I can. Have you got anything else you wanted to get to, Dave? And if
I'm good. Dallas, thank you, sir.
Okay.
Oh,
all right. Let me throw a couple more at you, Dallas, from our viewers tonight, because we've had a really great activity there that we don't always get, and glad to see that. One question that has come up multiple times is who's actually piloting the drone? So if I place an order from Walmart and it's being delivered to my home here by Wing, I noted in your introduction that you are a licensed remote pilot. Are you or someone like yourself sitting in a command center somewhere flying that drone to me? Is it being done on an automated flight path type thing? Who's actually flying the drone?
So the answer is a bit of a hybrid. So the drones themselves, their entire flight is controlled by automation. We do, however, in our command centers have licensed pilots that are overseeing the operations of a given sector, right? So I'm a former Air Force air traffic controller from many, many years ago. And that whole sector thing has a very direct analogy to air traffic control is, if you're working in an air traffic control center, you have a sector that you're responsible for, and then you work adjacent to other sectors and you hand aircraft off. But while they're in your sector, they're under your responsibility. So we do have highly qualified people that are monitoring the operations. And like I said, when things pop up, so for example, we get a notification of a planned balloon launch. Those same folks will draw that box or draw that circle that says, "Don't fly here," and the automation will ingest that and not route any more aircraft through that area. And so the flight plans are 100% automated. The flights are 100% automated. There's also complete health monitoring during the flights. So if for some reason there's a flag on any system of the airplane, then that is relayed back to the mothership in terms of the command center, and so we monitor the health of that drone and make sure that it's taking the appropriate actions. But when you're flying hundreds of operations a day, having a human pilot try to do that would be horribly unsafe. And so it's better to have that system automated. The drones are deconflicted. They're deconflicted from all the known aircraft that I talked about. And so the pilots become essentially area monitors to make sure that the system is working correctly and to issue corrections where needed.
This next question comes from Frank Anger, and I'm not sure that he hasn't answered his own question. He says, pray that it never happens, but who will be responsible if a drone that doesn't have avoidance software causes an accident that results in the loss of life. Well, on the one hand, if the drone caused it, that would seem to me that the drone or the drone operator would be responsible. But I'm guessing from your bio, you're not a lawyer, and that sounds more like a question that a lawyer in the courts would have to answer, including an investigation by the NTSB. But do you have an opinion on that?
I do, because it's and this is covered partially in Part 108 as well. So I'm gonna flip his question a little bit. So we talked about a drone that doesn't have an avoidance system. Well, if it doesn't have an avoidance system, there better be someone at the controls that's watching where that airplane's going. But I'm going to flip the question in this way: what happens if a highly automated drone that isn't being flown by a human being, right? We just talked about that. So what happens if there's an incident associated with that? And so Part 108 begins to address this, because absent the old Part 91 pilot and command rules, where you have one pilot, one airplane, and that pilot is responsible for the operation of that airplane, who's responsible. So in Part 135 operations, and we are a Part 135 certificated operator, there's the notion of what we call the big O, capital O operator. And then there's obviously, air crew and things of that nature. The operator in this, so if you were an airline, for example, it might be Delta Express, is responsible for many of the things that go on with that airplane. They're responsible to make sure that the maintenance was done correctly. They're responsible to make sure that it was dispatched correctly. They're responsible for all these things. Those kinds of responsibilities are being outlined in Part 108 to the drone operators, and rightfully so. And in the case of a highly automated drone, so I'm going to make another analogy. So if there's an accident because a flight management system on an airliner malfunctions, right? So NTSB is going to do their investigation, like you said. Was it programmed incorrectly by the pilot? Okay, that's on the pilot, right? Did it fail because it wasn't maintained properly? All right, that's on the operator. They didn't maintain it. Did it fail because it was designed incorrectly, or to not apply a correction in the right way? All right, that's going to go back to the FMS manufacturer, right? So whether that be, let's say it's GE or Garmin, whoever made the particular product. So if it's a design flaw, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but conceptually, if it's a design flaw or something that the system should have done that it didn't, and it wasn't a result of a human error or interaction, then that goes back towards the OEM who built that box. So there are analogies in the drone world that for a highly automated operation, the company is responsible for that operation versus an individual, say, pilot in command.
Right.
So there is still has to be a level of ultimate responsibility. Sooner or later, the buck stops. And it's not going to stop with the government. It's going to stop with whoever operated it, right? So if it's not an individual person, then it will be a company. And just like with individual people, if you have a PIC that violates a rule, they can yank that PIC's ticket. If you have an operator that violates a rule, you can yank their operating license or impose fines or whatever else you're going to do. So there are analogies there with how we do things in aviation today.
Final question then, and I'll use this one from my longtime friend Nick Stanko. He's asking, has Wing actually performed any tests of their drones involving, and I would assume that means like in proximity with hot air balloons, and I'll follow that with, if not, would you be interested in doing so?
Well, in terms of testing, so again, our DAA system is sort of, not meant for that. We use other means, but if you're talking about like how the drone,
I guess I'm thinking he's asking, have you done any testing with the drone flying in proximity to a balloon and how it avoids? Did it avoid it successfully? What was the modus operandi for that avoidance? I'm guessing that's Nick's purpose here.
Yeah, well, the answer is no, because there's not a mechanism to test there. That's not part of our automated system. So no. Now, as soon as
other than I would assume that your system is automated to avoid obstacles, and it would see the balloon as an obstacle, right?
So our system is when we talk about obstacles, those are generally ground based, and so our obstacle avoidance system is downward focused. So that's not really meant to be an air-to-air obstacle avoidance system. So again, that's not part of our automated piece. We do that through manual or other means.
Okay. Very good. As Dave said, Dallas, thank you so much for being with us tonight. It's been a pleasure, and I think our audience has gotten a great deal of information. It's great to see someone such as yourself taking the outreach to speak to our part of the aviation community, because you're going to have a big impact in some ways on our operations, and we're going to have to find ways to share the airspace and play nicely with each other. And from what I gathered, Wing is certainly doing a great deal to do that, and that's very much appreciated on our part.
Well, just some closing thoughts from me. One, I love this community. So you guys have been amazing to work with. A fun fact: the video that we showed earlier,
yeah,
the guy that produced that video is named Alex Zavada. His brother is Joe Zavada.
A national champion, a past national champion.
There you go.
Yeah.
So to say that you guys have a special place in our hearts for a lot of reasons is a big deal. The second thing I want to say is if any of your members are planning operations anywhere near one of the cities that we're operating, and you haven't already established a relationship, which I think is unlikely, but just in case, our generic email address for outreach is aviationoutreach@wing.com. Drop us a line, and Josh or somebody else will get back with you right away.
Outstanding. Again, thank you for being with us tonight. It was interesting to learn about your drone. In our next couple of programs, we're going to have other operators on and that operate, as we know, possibly larger and more significantly or potentially dangerous drones to us. But it's a thrill to have you with us tonight and to learn about Wing and its operation, and appreciate your time and your interest in the lighter than air community and sharing that information with us tonight. So Dallas, again, thank you very much. That's going to bring this edition of Inside the BFA to a close. We hope that you've enjoyed this very frank conversation about Wing and its operation and how we can work together in our shared airspace. And again, this is the first of what we think will be 3 consecutive, we hope, episodes dealing with drones, UAVs, UAS, and their impact on our flying areas. So on behalf of Dallas and Dave tonight, thank you all for viewing, and we'll see you next month on another edition of Inside the BFA. Good night, everybody.
Thank you for viewing this episode of Inside the BFA. Membership in the Balloon Federation of America is your entry into the sport of ballooning, whether you're a pilot, crew, or an enthusiast. Everyone is welcome inside the BFA. For more information, see our website at www.bfa.net.